Hey, everyone. Hi, everyone. We're having slight technical difficulties in the schoolhouse, so we're just going to be a couple minutes. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Portola Valley Finance Committee. And we're going to get started. We have quorum. So I will do a roll call. Committee member Savage, thanks so much for taking notes.
Okay.
Minutes. I'll start with myself, Lucy Neely. I'm present. I'm going to do the icebreaker as usual, where we can share one thing we can feel grateful for in this moment. I am grateful for the sunshine and for my family. Yeah. Committee member Savage, are you here and can you share something?
I am here and I'm grateful that we have an audit to review.
Excellent. Committee member Urban is back in the house.
I'm here and grateful to be back from a long overnight flight and still wide awake.
Excellent. Committee member Takai.
Yeah, hi. I'm grateful that we didn't lose power over the last 3 weeks, just in some little intermittent problems with internet, but never lost power.
And committee member Levine. Oh, you're on mute.
So I'm present and no longer muted. I'm grateful that I know how to unmute.
Excellent. Great. And committee member Kasani was not able to be here for some scheduling issues, and committee member Pressman had some pressing family issues come up at the last moment. Now we will go to agenda item number 2, oral communications for items not on the agenda. So any items that are on the agenda, please don't offer commentary about those. Save that for when we get to that agenda item. And speakers' time is limited to 3 minutes. I do want to put out there that I'm going to try my best to keep this. I would like to have this meeting adjourned by 5 p.m. or run for 2 hours at maximum. So yeah. Okay. Oral communications for items not on the agenda.
Rita, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. There was a number of backdated finance minutes that were magically appeared about halfway through the last committee meeting in October. Were those minutes accepted by the committee? Were they approved by the committee? I've attended several meetings over the past couple of years, and the number of minutes was over 1.5 years worth of minutes. And I've attended many of these meetings where the minutes were incomplete, and so the committee did not vote on them, or they needed to be corrected. So the committee voted on some with those corrections, or there were no minutes during that meeting. And so there were, but suddenly all of these appeared. Is something going to be added to those minutes that showed up last time, a disclaimer, since I'm not sure if these, the finance committee I'm part of, I'm as a board member, have a fiduciary responsibility to the minutes, them being as accurate as they can be. Is there going to be a disclaimer, or all of those going to be pulled back so that the committee members can review them and decide if they can remember that to approve them? What's going to happen with those minutes? I'm not sure if anyone's going to answer, but it's a question that should be answered. And I also want the committee to know that I received a correspondence from your chair that I know about the people asking questions, making your meeting a little bit longer. It is the right of the residents of this town that pay taxes and live in this town to ask questions on the things that are being presented, or the questions that we might have of this committee. And unfortunately, this committee has not met as often as it possibly could have and was promised in the past couple of meetings. But it is our right to ask questions. And I hope that the questions that the residents ask are collated and answered in some form, if not today, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Sure, I'll answer that question about minutes. Those minutes followed the standard Portola Valley Committee minute process. They were all voted on and approved by members of the committee. The process is that the minutes are taken live during the meeting by a member, and then they are finalized, and that committee member sends their draft minutes along, and then the next meeting we vote to make amendments or approve the minutes, and then afterwards they're posted. You're right, there was a backlog. I actually had sent most of those minutes previously to the previous town clerk, and I don't know why they were not posted, but I have email documentation of that. And it wasn't magic that they were posted. They were posted prior to the meeting because I made sure to want to catch up on them. And regarding the communication about public commentary, the concern was about members of the public directing questions to council members during committee meetings, and whether that was an appropriate use of committee time. Thank you. Betsy Morgenthau.
Thank you. I was waiting to be unmuted. Thank you, Lucy. And I'd like to ask the committee's consideration to move item 6 and item 7 discussing the chair position and that of an independent audit committee forward in the agenda today to items number 1 and 2. My rationale is that the leadership and the lines of reporting, audit reporting, are both very important, and moving them forward in the agenda would allow their consideration absent the very dense pack agenda that you've planned and your desire to wrap everything up by 5 o'clock. I'd like to see the discussion when the committee is still fresh and attentive, and so that you don't run shy of time. Also, I think the conversation would be cleaner up forward of the meaty agenda you've planned for the day. Thank you.
Okay. Any other oral communications for items not on the agenda? Great, we're gonna move on to number 3. Are there any announcements or presentations from the committee or anybody that would participate in this agenda item? Okay, great. Then we're gonna move on to agenda item number 4.
May I make just a quick comment? I know residents who come in virtually like to know this. There is no one attending in person in the schoolhouse right now. It's just members of the committee and myself. Thanks.
Great. Agenda item number 4 is approval of minutes for October 18th, 2022 meeting. If committee members could a moment to refresh your familiarity with those. Thanks to committee member Takai for taking those minutes. And then when anyone feels inspired or confident, if we could get a motion to approve minutes.
I move to approve.
Well, first I'll guess, are there any amendments anybody wants to make to these minutes? Pardon me, Joe.
That's okay. I move to approve the minutes.
Okay. Can I get a second?
Wait a minute. Um,
Okay, Betsy, it sounds like as a member of the public, you'd like to speak. And Ken, I also see you raising your hand. So I will go to Ken first. Yes, Ken?
Well, I was just seconding the motion
Ah,
to accept the minutes as written.
okay, thank you. We'll get right back to that. I'm gonna take Betsy's hand raised first. Betsy Morgenthaler?
Yes, thank you. I was quoted and as I was quoted as questioning the relationship with our outside auditor, that could be misinterpreted. I wasn't questioning the relationship. I want a relationship with the outside auditor. So what I said was an outside auditor is a good thing, but the town was not currently receiving the benefit, the value of an outside auditor, given that there's no independent relationship between the committee and the auditor. I just thought that it was confused the way that it was presented.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on or amendments requested for these minutes? Great, let's try that again then. George, will you, one more time, third time's the charm?
Sure. Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Committee Member Levine. Okay, if we could have a vote on, do we need to do a roll call vote on this? Or can we just? Okay, roll call vote on approving the minutes as amended. Committee Member Takai,
Yes, approved.
thank you. Committee Member Urban,
Voting present.
and the other two committee members made the motion. So I also vote in the affirmative and the minutes are passed as amended. Great. Moving on to agenda item 5A, new business, review the fiscal year 1920 audit and discuss. I would like to just preface this agenda item with some context and review for anybody who wasn't at the last meeting or anybody who forgot. Just to say that, everyone recognizes this is a stressful situation to have the audits be this behind, and I don't think anybody is happy about it. And the staff is actively working to catch up. The conditions for why the audits were behind, it was a confluence of factors. Staff turnover at a crucial moment, moving to a new software platform that turned out to be a very cumbersome transition. And that was timed with the beginning of the pandemic, which, as everyone knows, also created a lot of disruption. And I could name a lot of things in that affected this process. But glad we're here to talk about it today and get it back on track again. So Jeremy, would you like to take this one away, or are we turning it over to Grace?
So I'll turn it over quickly to Cindy. I'm sure she's got just a few very quick remarks. But I want to reiterate on your comments, Lucy. We agree. No one is happy that we're in the place that we are. We are working diligently to move forward and catch up on the issues that, it was a year that was a very difficult year for the staff as it related to a whole host of issues. And unfortunately, this has been one victim to that. So I appreciate your comments. Cindy, you may have a few comments, but, and really what we want to do is just turn it over to any questions that you might have. We're joined by Grace Zhang with Mays and Associates. Good to see you, Grace. Happy New Year. And Jim Sacco, our fiscal consultant. For those who don't know Jim, Jim's recently retired. I don't know if I can say that anymore if you're recently retired, but you are retired from the county as the budget director for the county of San Mateo. So we're happy to have your expertise here. Cindy?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I will keep this as brief as possible, just to kind of highlight for fiscal year 1920, overall assets of the town exceeded its liabilities as of June 30, 2020 by 46.4 million. The total net position decreased by $66,874. The decrease in net position is primarily due to capital depreciation, increased obligations for pensions and other post-employment benefits. These were largely offset by increases in fund balance. An overall change of just under 0.1% over fiscal year 18-19. This is also reflected in page 16. And I just wanted to also highlight on page 17 of the packet, we've also summarized a few additional observations for fiscal year 2020. At this time, I just would like to open it up for any questions or comments.
So what's the timing of the next 2 years audits? When do we expect that complete?
Cindy, you want me to take that?
Under your grace or?
Turn my camera back on here. Sorry, my camera's a little goofy on my computer today. My apologies. So Cindy's actively working on 2021. And if we understood the direction from the finance committee that those will be brought back concurrently. If there's a difference there, if you'd like to see them one at a time, we're happy to do that as well. So it's our desire to complete the 2021 and the 21-22, which we would be working on right now over the course of the rest of the winter into the spring. I don't want to assign a date to it because every time I assign a date, it slips. But I would imagine that we're able, depending on the availability of the auditor as well, during that process to see a completion before we bring the budget forward. Cindy, do you have anything to add to that?
Cindy, you're muted.
Sorry about that. No, nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thanks.
And I would just like to encourage us to meet the goal, right? So that before we have the next budget, we close out the cycle. One reason it's a little difficult to have lots of questions on the current audit is it's already so far behind where the rest of us are in our thinking that getting current on this, I think, will be really, really helpful. And indeed, the significant weakness that was something we all agreed to that was identified is the lack of resources that led to us being so late at closing the finances. And so at some point in the discussion, I'd just love to hear what we can actually do to make certain that you and the staff aren't so stretched that we wind up falling behind in a way that appropriately, I think, has some members of the public concerned. And
Sure.
Lots of stories flying around.
I am sure they are flying around. And I appreciate the question. So we have had one of the areas that we've identified for opportunity is increasing staffing. The council did budget through ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan funds, a position. Filling that position has been impossible for a whole host of reasons. Cindy pivoted recently to engage with more non-traditional firms to bring in folks who might be able to help. I understand she had an engagement recently with someone we worked with in the past, actually through a temp agency, who's now started a firm that has what I would call governmental, fiscal, and accounting types. So we're really enthusiastic that someone will come out of that group shortly. Cindy, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot because I'm not sure there's an update there yet, but that tends to happen fairly quickly. So I would hope in the next few weeks that person would come on board, and then you sort of see a domino effect. We're able to transfer some of the most basic functionality out of Nicole and Cindy's shop to that person, and then we free up the space to do the other work. Cindy, do you have anything to add to that?
Not much more of an update. I did meet with the representative of the temp agency. We discussed briefly some details, what we're looking for, and she is expecting to provide me some information on candidates, available candidates, and we're really shooting to get them started by February.
Great. I'd just like to request that at the first sign that something isn't happening and you have another gap, that staff puts up their hands and lets us know. And that way it goes from being your problem to being all of our problem collectively. and everyone's informed and we can all brainstorm on what to do, either remove some work elsewhere or add more resource or come up with a different idea rather than getting into a hole. And we all understand the pandemic was hopefully never to be repeated and extraordinary. And hopefully we live with our software system now for a good long time, but it just, as a rule, anytime there's a problem, put your hand up.
We will do that. Thank you, George. Appreciate it.
Thank you, George. Anything else from staff
Me-
on this topic? No? Okay.
I have a question on,
Yes.
along the same lines that we were just discussing at our last meeting, we talked about possibilities of catching up since we still have 2 more audits to go through. And one of the ideas was to do a 24-month audit instead of a 12-month audit for the final 2 years. Was there any decision on that or any discussion of that?
If I can, through the chair. Grace, since you are here, I would look to you to give us some advice on whether or not that's doable, et cetera. There may be some rules I'm not aware of, or there may be some other issue that is worth mentioning. Grace, could you speak to that?
Okay, yeah, this is the first time I heard about town's intention to have maybe 2 years, but thank you for raising this question, Ken. I just want to clarify, it's not really whether you are doing 1 year or 2 year that's dragging the schedule behind. The main issue is that we want to, even if we go for 2 years, we want to have the data ready, accurate. So it doesn't, for us as an auditor, turnaround is not because of 1 year or 2 year. It's more based on whether the data are ready there for us to audit. So Ken, I think your question about 1 year or 2 year, that's not really something that's dragging on. It's more if this year's, because regardless whether it's 1 year or 2 year, all the information, all the audit process is still the same. It just making it condensed into 2 years audit report, but in terms of all the procedures or the compliance that we have to go through, do all the testing, due diligence testing, those will still remain the same. So the main focus would be whether town is ready, the financial is ready for that particular year or for those 2 particular years.
Well, Grace, it seems to me that that doesn't quite compute in my mind. We're talking about 1 24-month audit where you only need to accrue end of year once, which would be end of the most recent year, versus 2 audits, 2 12-month audits where everything has to be done twice, including what balances you actually have to audit. And so it isn't a question of doing 1 24-month versus 1 12-month. It's 2 12 months versus 1 24-month.
Grace, do you have anything to respond to that?
I am not quite sure about the question, but are you talking about accrual for the 1 year or versus accrual for 2 years? Because each individual year is responsible for its own balance sheet and income statement. So if you are skipping 1 year, it might distort that particular year's financial statements. So I would not, I have not done 2 years issuing an audit opinion for 2 years before. I would definitely need to check if there's such an exceptional case for such situation. But based on my experience, I would not suggest to go that way.
Okay, so I'm hearing from our auditor that she thinks this is maybe not the most prudent, or we wouldn't gain much in efficiency in this way, but I'm also hearing from the committee that we're concerned about timing and pace. And so Jeremy and Cindy, could you work with Grace just to explore this idea a little bit more to see if we can find efficiencies by stacking the two remaining audits?
Happy to. Thank you.
Could I ask Grace one more question?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Grace, is there any reason to be concerned that we won't be able to make the time frame we're aiming for, which is through the winter, early spring, we get both of these next audits complete?
Yeah, so I understand the challenge the town is facing right now is 2 years behind. So my goal is really to try to help as much as possible. So as long as town's financial is ready for us, we will put this as a top priority. If you're ready, like by February for both years, we can start the 2 years audit concurrently, doing all the things. Yeah, so it's the sooner the better. From my point of view, we will try to put it as a top priority and put our all resources possible to help facilitate towns catching up. That's
Great.
that's the best I could do in terms of audit schedule. But that being said, I want to clarify that's assuming that the town's financial for both FY21 and 22 are ready for us to move forward. That's the most important thing. We will accommodate whatever schedules that's ready.
Great, thank you.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, Grace, are you saying you haven't even started fiscal year 21?
Yes,
You haven't even started that?
no, we have not.
Wow.
So we're in the process of pulling everything together. So that's where we're at on 2021 using the templates from 1920. So
Yes.
Cindy's been working on that for a little while. She's obviously got other duties and responsibilities. So that's what we're completing at this point. And we feel pretty confident we can get that all straightened out pretty quickly.
Are there other questions, comments from committee members, either for staff generally or for Grace?
Again, I have a question. What struck me after spending a couple hours looking over the report, what struck me the most was that the auditors signed off on the report one day after our last meeting. So I'm kind of wondering, why didn't we delay the meeting a week so we could have used and gone through this whole discussion last October?
I believe, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we had already canceled our previous finance meeting for the reason of the audit not being ready, and it wasn't totally clear when it was going to be, and we just wanted to get information to the public and have a conversation about this rather than canceling another meeting.
Yeah, and I would add additionally, there were 2 non-financial documents that were not completed, and those were sent to us in January.
Any
Are
more
you saying
questions?
that they signed off on this before there were some documents they were supposed to look at?
No. These were the documents at the end of the audit that are, excuse me, let me pull it up. These were non-financial documents. They are the MOC.
It was a memorandum of internal controls and
Thank you, Cindy.
I'm trying to find the title of the other report.
The required communication.
Yes, required communications. Thank you, Grace.
Oh, you're welcome.
And if I recall the committee meeting in October, Grace spoke to the former document that there were no apparent issues at that time.
Okay, any more questions or comments from committee members? Okay, gonna open this up to public comment. Rita.
Yeah, thank you for taking my question. I have a strong concern with the audit being signed off before being presented in front of completed almost completed before it's been signed off by this particular committee, which this committee's title, remind me if I'm wrong, is the Finance and Audit Committee of the town of Portola Valley. And at the last meeting, it seems like there was a strong concern, and that was October 18th, 2022, a strong concern about just moving forward with these particular audits. And I was happy to see that and throwing resources at it. That was October 18th. And I'm surprised to hear that temp agencies are just now being talked to without people with, feet on the ground actually doing the work, and that 2021 hasn't been started because the materials aren't ready yet. And those two audits that are not started should be done separately. We had a couple of very unique years, 2020 into 2021 and 2021 into 2022 with all of the government COVID dollars, our tax dollars that were then brought back to the town. And I know I keep asking for information. I don't see the information. I don't know, perhaps other people are seeing the information, but it doesn't sound like this particular committee, the Finance and Audit Committee of the town of Portola Valley, is seeing this information. So, I have a concern about this particular one. Are the people in this particular committee going to then read through and sign off again with a letter? And I notice on page 88, the memorandum of internal control, it's using these causes, that the audit company is writing down that due to staff's turnover, but I don't know if that's the position of the town writing that and giving that answer to the audit company, or is it the audit company writing that particular statement? Because if you look at the warrant list, there are, thousands and thousands of dollars we're paying consultants. And it just looks bad on the town historically, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, someone looking back and saying, what? They spent all this money on consultants and they couldn't do the audit or end the year's books. I'm embarrassed as a resident that this isn't done. And I hope that, these other two are done properly, done timely, and this particular committee or a separate audit committee gets to review it before it's signed off. Thank you.
Thank you. If either Jeremy or Cindy or Grace would care to respond to that? No, not necessary, but if you want to.
The one thing I wanted to respond to was the notion that we have not been actively trying to find staffing. That's inaccurate. We have interviewed multiple people over the course of a period of time, and that was not fruitful. So that's why we turned to alternative ways to fill the position. Cindy's interviewed 10 to 15 people, I believe, over the course of the recruitment. We kept it extended. So I just want to make that point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Jeremy.
I'm sorry,
Yep.
through the chair. The other comment I'd like to make is 1920 did not have ARPA funds. So they're not going to be included in this audit.
Okay, thank you. Cindy or Grace, is there anything you would like to respond to that previous public comment? No, not necessary. Okay. Allison Wood-Illick, I see your hand up.
Hi, I'm relatively new to this whole situation, but I'm kind of blown away that we are in this situation. This is a question I think maybe for Jeremy and Cindy. I'm wondering if there were resident volunteers with an accounting background, or even with just some minimal training to help classify expenses, get up to speed on what the current chart of accounts looks like and just help to wade through all this. Can we do that? I understand the challenge in trying to find people to help, but if there are definable areas, projects that you can give to volunteers, I think there are people that would be happy to come down there and help.
Thank you for that suggestion.
Did you want me to respond to that?
Only if you want to.
I'm not sure that I have a response that's that would be fairly unusual. I'm open to any and all suggestions on how to move forward. I don't know of a city that utilizes volunteer residents to work on accounting or budgeting or other issues that if it doesn't preclude that conversation. I'd like to hire somebody and get them in and make that work before we turn to other.
Well, the reason why I suggest it is because it seems like we have tried to hire people and it isn't working. So,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of smart people in this town.
I don't think we do a back and forth during public comment. So
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion. I think we understand the motivation.
Can I just ask Jeremy a question?
Yes, you can.
Jeremy, just what is the cause of 10 or 15 people rejecting us? Is it a compensation thing relative to private sector opportunities or something lacking in Portola Valley? I mean, what is the theme on why we're unsuccessful thus far?
Cindy, you might be a little closer to this, but so Cindy and I did reviews of all the various people that applied. Of the, I mean, this is fairly typical. I would say of the 40 or 50 applications we received, there were only a handful that actually had any qualifications. We certainly were looking for people that had some public sector experience. We got a subset of those within the folks, and we interviewed some people beyond what we were comfortable with, just to make sure we weren't missing anything in the resumes. I am sure there were some compensation related issues. There were certainly people who misrepresented their resume and their skill set. I understand Cindy asked some basic questions that people were having some trouble answering. Cindy?
Yes, and then also some of the people that we extended an invitation to interview, we got no shows.
Hiring is a nightmare right now. I don't know how to put it in other terms. Howard's had this similar issue. It's harder at what I would call line staff level right now. The salaries generally are not competitive. And that's always been true in Portola Valley. As you guys know, in this committee, I've spent some time trying to adjust salaries to a place that are more competitive, but they still continue to be a challenge for us. That's going to be the case for salaries that are below six figures. It's just very hard.
Okay, well, something for us to consider bringing to the town council is the whole compensation approach here, because it's false economy to run a government where we spend 90% of the money and we don't achieve the results we need to do to assure that everything's in order. So we may have to just pay more.
Well, just pointing out the obvious that this is obviously an extremely important issue that will no doubt be discussed or brought at the council level. So encourage folks to chime in on that point in the conversation as well. I see a phone number 678-7562 with their hand up. Would you like to speak?
Great, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
For some reason, I have a problem accessing the Zoom meeting via my computer today, but I really thank the comments of George. We spend a lot of money, and that was also echoed by the concerns from residents. We have spent much more money, a lot of money, and we're trying to have some transparency in that money because we don't see any results. My question is regarding page 101, and I think it was just recently explained that the 2020 will not have any, will not see any results of the urban funds. This is another very interesting topic that we, the residents, have been interested in. They mentioned the urban funds, investment funds, and yet nobody can explain it to us. And then I see in this report, page 101, and I don't understand how this fits in here because this is this is dated 2022 and 23, and yet we're talking about the 2019 and
Carolyn,
2020.
that's material for a different agenda item.
Okay. We want transparency before this elaborate government system was put in place with the promise that it would create transparency, that it would have less require less jobs, manpower. This all has not been true. And every time we attend a meeting, another promise is made. I think we would like to see a promise. And if you have volunteers who want to come, who are qualified and who want to help, I think these are the people who are invested in this community. And I think you should really consider this. Thank you.
Thank you. David Cardinal.
Hi. To think of this in the form of a question, I think it'd be helpful if the members of the Finance Committee or someone helped explain to the members of the public who don't always seem to understand the difference between audited financials, a budget, our checkbook, if you will, because I think it's really important to note that as far as I know, the money that we, the people of Portola Valley, have wanted spent has been spent on exactly what we asked it to be spent on. And we have a pretty good line item breakdown of that. And Craig Hughes made some nice charts of that. And there's a ton of information, which isn't that easy to understand, but the new categorization, I think, is easier than the old one, which I could never figure out at all. And yeah, we don't have an audit, and that's really important. I run companies and nonprofits, and audits are important. But the truth is, hopefully, it's just going to tell us the same thing we already know. We're having a hard time hiring people, so we're late. But there's no material discrepancies. There's no real thing going on. So I don't know. Yeah, maybe we should have an audit committee and all that. But people believing that that's some reason to think that there's money hidden under that desk you're sitting at, I mean, good luck to you if you can find it. But no, I think we're spending our money on what we think we should be. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cardinal. Any more comments from the public? Okay. Any more comments or questions? Oh, Christy Corley has raised her hand. Christy Corley. Christy, you're up for public comment if you'd like.
Thank you. I was raising my hand a while back and it just turned on just now. So I'm hoping that you're watching, that we're trying to raise our hand. I would like kind of definitions of all of our finance people. I see Jim Seiko and Cindy and Jeremy and really understanding everyone's roles in the finance area. And then could it be a question that we have a separate audit committee from the finance committee? That's my question. Thank you.
Yep, that's an agenda item on this agenda. Okay, members of the public, that looks like everyone has been able to speak who wants to. Any more comments or questions from members of the Finance Committee? Okay, so in summary, I think I'm just summarizing what the members of the public have stated, as well as members of the Finance Committee and staff. I think and our auditor, I think everyone's on the same page that we want to get back on track, and that staff is working to do that. And no one is happy about this situation. Everybody wants to get back on track. It's yeah. Okay. So moving to agenda item.
Thank you, Jim and Grace, for coming today.
Yes. Thank you, Jim and Grace, for coming today. Grace, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. So I will sign off. Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
Grace.
day.
Thank you so much, Grace.
Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Grace.
See you next time.
See you.
Okay, so moving on, thanks, Jeremy, for that reminder. Moving on to 5C, the agenda item is Form Subcommittee on Inclusionary Housing Fund. This material in the agenda packet is at the end of the agenda packet. It's after the audit and, oh, wait, am I missing an agenda item?
Yeah, 5B.
Yes, pardon me. 5B, review the update on the PV investment fund. I got excited. So we have Mr. Bill Urban back on the Finance Committee, and he is going to give us an update on the PV investment fund, which is in the agenda packet after the audit material.
So in your packet, I believe it's on page 101, you see a form of the investment fund performance report. This was put together a week ago. I have been gone and unavailable to update it in the last week, but it doesn't move that much over the course of a period that short. So just the highlights, the last committee meeting back on October 18th, 2022, the total dollar value in the investment fund was just over 4.5 million. You see that in the second column labeled October 18th, 2002. I wasn't on the committee at that point, so I can't speak definitively, but I'm pretty sure that's close to the lowest value that the fund had since it's been fully invested over the last 3 to 4 years, and also coincides with the big decline in the bond market.
Committee member Urban, could I ask you to give some context on this investment fund? I think we have a lot of members of the public here, and most of them probably don't understand where this investment fund came from.
Okay, sure. So let me back up. The investment fund was created, again, I think it's about 4 to 5 years ago, because the town had significant cash reserves, and a portion of those funds, in fact, the vast majority of those funds, were held in the local agency investment fund, which is managed by San Mateo County. Essentially, that's a money market fund. So it's basically cash equivalents, very safe, but traditionally low yields. The town and other municipalities within California have the ability to invest in a, let's say, a more aggressive or more diversified manner other than just using their local money market funds. But the important thing to understand is they're not allowed to own equities, stocks of any types. It has to be in fixed income investments. And this fund was put together 4 to 5 years ago to represent at low cost through mutual funds or exchange traded funds, the key elements of the broad bond market. So the 3 line items that you see on the performance report are the same ones we've had since the inception. The VTIP, that's the name of an exchange fund from Vanguard, provides treasury bonds, the inflation protected bonds. These are bonds that are designed to adjust according to inflation. So they provide the greatest stability to the 3 components of the fund itself. And under the terms that we as the committee decided on, we allocated 10% of the total fund to that type of investment. The largest type of investment was to be to government short-term bonds. These are usually 1 to 3 year maturity bonds. They tend to be more stable than longer maturity bonds. That means they drop less when interest rates go up. And that fund is also a Vanguard exchange traded fund. About 62% of the total fund was allocated to that. And then the final component is a corporate short-term bond fund. That's the Vanguard VCSH fund. 28% of the total was the target allocation for that. That over time should be the fund that tends to have the highest total returns because it's corporate bonds, not quite as safe as government bonds. The intent here was not to really time the market in any fashion to try to pick what would be the hot corner of the bond market over any period of time. This was intended to be a buy and hold place where cash reserves could be held for the long-term benefit of the town, compliant with California code, and any other types of investments beyond the money market fund essentially would come through another topic, which we're not talking about tonight, but we have a fund to fund other than pension benefits. And that fund under state law is allowed to be into diversified portfolios, which can be invested in stocks and bonds and potentially have a higher return. But that's not what we're talking about on this chart. This is the fund that is technically managed by the town and the staff. This committee originally designed this portfolio and provides comment and education and reporting on it. We don't technically have the ability to make recommendations to the staff or to the town council on changes to be made to it. I don't think that's a major issue because, as I said earlier, the intent of this fund is not for us to be moving money in and out of different, categories of the bond market. It's designed as a long-term, well-designed, low-cost buy and hold investment portfolio.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let me just jump to what's happened. So the backdrop to all this, of course, the worst bond performance we've seen in the U.S. markets has happened over the last year to year and a half. It's the worst we've seen in the last 40 to 50 years. And because this is the only types of holdings we could have beyond money market, the fund over the last several years, during the time before I rejoined, I'm sure suffered some losses. The losses were mitigated by the fact that these tend to be very conservative bond funds. They have short maturities and so forth. I think there's some good news here. I referenced when I started that last meeting over a year ago, 4.5 million was the total value in the fund. It's now risen to about 4.589 million. That's in the second column called value at close on October 11th. That shaded number, 4.58 million, if you translate it into the total return over that time period, which is just under 3 months, is over in the third box that's heavily shaded, 1.94%, if you see that under total investments. So since that last meeting, that's almost a 1.94% return, a little under 3 months, which is, it's pretty good for a bond fund. And so what is going on there? Most likely, because we know the Fed is not finished tightening, that it seems like there may be at least 1 or 2 more rounds of tightening, maybe not the same degree to which they've done it in the past. So why would that return start to trend up? The most likely reason is because some of the bonds in the last 6 months, 3 months have matured, and the funds have been able to buy now higher yielding bonds in the marketplace to add to the portfolio. So what we're starting to pick up higher bonds with higher coupon rates in the portfolio. And as we go on over the next 6 to 10 to 12 months, some more of those bonds will roll over and the fund will be buying into higher coupon bonds. So that rate could continue to go up even if the Fed continues to raise rates a very modest amount. If the Fed should stop raising rates, or we hope at some point, maybe in the long future, see rates decline, then that total return number could start to grow quite rapidly. That would be a nice thing to see, given the history of this fund. The first 2 years of this fund, it did quite well, and then it suffered like all bond investors did, as I said, over the last 18 months. So those are the important highlights. There's some other data on the report that may be of interest to some. The one thing I did, which I always caution how to interpret it, but I like to show it to people. There's the third box shows the total return we have over the last 3 months of each of the 3 funds, and then the shaded amount for the total. And then I annualize that number to get an annualized total return. Now, what is that? That's not a real number in the sense that that hasn't happened yet. It simply is the run rate. If the return we've gotten over the last 3 months were to continue for another 9 months, and then we look back and said, what was our total return over that time period? It would be 8.61%. So that's a projection that what's happened over the last 3 months will continue to happen over the next period of a full year. It's not a real number. It hasn't happened yet. It's not a projection where this fund is going to go, but it does tell you that the trend over the last 3 months has been pretty favorable and much more favorable than we've seen for this fund over the last year and a half. Finally, the bottom part of the chart is actually not part of this presentation for tonight. I left that on there because I believe in a previous meeting, there was some question about the percentage of various bond holdings that were reflected by holdings in the oil and gas industry. So that's just on there as basically a footnote relative to prior meeting. That's not new data that I've updated. Well, one last thing. I believe there have not been any new additions of town cash reserves or funds over the last 2 to 3 years. There also have not been any withdrawals. So that has just been essentially a closed box. It doesn't have to be. The town at any time can liquidate any of these investments at relatively low cost, have cash equivalents within one trading day. They can add new investments at any time, at very low cost, purchase new holdings. So it's a very liquid, very low cost, very flexible fund as it's currently designed.
Great. Thank you, Committee Member Urban. Thank you for the context and all the information and the thoughtful details. It is great to have you back on the committee. Going to open this up to committee members if there are any questions or discussion about this agenda item. Committee Member Takai.
So a couple questions, Bill. First, we missed you. Welcome back. So I believe we originally started with around 5 million. Is that correct?
I don't have the numbers in front.
I thought it was roughly 5. Anyway,
It was 4.5.
I'm sorry.
4.5 million.
Oh, so we haven't really lost any money?
Correct. Correct. It's done over the course of the past few years. It's done relatively well. There has been some some decreases, but overall it's done well.
So well, you're saying we've not lost any money. Because I was asking, so in theory, are the gains or losses mark to market? Do you know that? That's probably a Grace question.
Well, let me answer that. Yeah, I mean, the reality is every one of these funds is marked to market every day in the marketplace because the prices of each of these funds changes every day as the market moves. On any given day, we could pull up the prices and the value of the holdings, and it would represent the current market value of all of those funds and their yields and their holdings. So that's the way to see it. This is not historic. This is data on what happened, but it's actually the values on the dates as they existed in the marketplace.
Right, but in theory, on our financial statements, we should see a gain or loss at the end of the year. Is that right? Bill, I know this is an accounting question. I don't think I've seen any reference to gains or losses on this. Maybe there was there, I just missed it.
Oh, I mean on the financial reports.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
Is it required? I just don't know the rules on again, marking to market.
No, there is a line item I recall. I don't remember what it's called, but it talks about either investment returns or interest. It may have the word interest on it.
Oh.
That does show the money that was earned. I think that combines both the local agency investment fund, the money market fund, and this investment fund, and it shows and it calls like interest. The terminology here is kind of commingled. When you have a fund, the payouts are called dividends, but what they represent is interest paid on the bonds that are held within the fund. A money market fund pays a dividend too, but that's interest to you and me and everybody else. So it's,
You think any change in the fair market value is running through that account?
Definitely, yes.
Who said that?
It shows that and it indicated that in the report.
Okay, thank you, Ken. And then finally, Bill, since we got lectured on it for so many years, I know we don't have current cash, but at one time you would tell us we needed to up the return on investment. I think you did it for 5, 6, 7 years. Have you looked recently at our current cash and would you recommend or consider putting more into this fund, or you don't have enough data?
Well, so I'll talk in terms of education as opposed to recommendations or what I would suggest doing. I think there's a broader question I've had, and I think some other committee members have had, which has to do with the following question: what do we want to do with the cash reserves that we have? We have substantial cash reserves. I don't know the most recent number, but they're far in excess of what's required under the policy of the town. We have options for what we do with that money. Some of it's held in bank, the bank for the liquidity needs of the town. Some of it's held in the local agency investment fund. So much that's in the investment committee, or I'm sorry, in the investment fund. And I'm looking at the report they just handed to me. Approximately $13 to $14 million, if I'm reading this correctly, is the total value of basically liquid funds held across the town's accounts. That's a fairly large number for a town of this size. There are certain dedicated funds, like the fund that's used for that's available for acquisition of property that is restricted. Restricted funds cannot be used for other purposes, and they have to be held in a certain manner and so forth. The unrestricted funds is the potential funds where we could talk more about what is the best way to hold those funds. The real problem for us is this: a bond portfolio like this, or the local agency investment fund, over long periods of time, the council is aware of this, and we've talked to them about this many times. It doesn't earn you great returns. The best you can expect to do over long periods of time is to just stay ahead of inflation by between 0.5% and 1.5% per year. And in a down time like we had with the Fed raising rates, you can't even do that well. You do worse than that. You actually underperform inflation. So an issue I think for us to think about is not so much to think about, is there a different investment fund or structure to use, because under state law, we have very little, there's not a lot of knobs we can turn to adjust that. What we do have control over are certain accounts, for example, that allow us to invest beyond cash and bonds to get higher returns, like the other than pension benefit funds. That's one area to look at. Whether, over time, do we want to allocate a larger portion of these funds to that? Number two, if the reserve is beyond what the needs of the town are, should we, in fact, spend some of the reserve for needs that we know the town has now or may have in future years? I know one of the issues we'll be talking about at some point is there a argument to do deficit spending, and in what years and under what consequences or under restrictions? Deficit spending, if you have large or even excessive reserves, can be a very good use of money. It can be a very good return on investment, because we don't have a lot of alternatives as a local municipality. And in the most extreme of cases, if you have excess cash and you don't have a productive use for it, it's possible to give it back to the taxpayers. At a future meeting, I might suggest an agenda item that is probably not for discussion now, about doing a more quantitative analysis of how much cash and how much reserves does the town need to hold in these types of investment fund and LAF funds, and can we do something else with the balance without impacting the town's ability to respond in a emergency, whether it's from earthquake or wildfire or anything else. And a part of that would be to think of the money we have as having a real opportunity cost. We can't invest it in a way to get much more than a minuscule return above inflation. So there's a cost to it. Might it be better if we had a need, an emergency for cash, to go out and borrow it? to the federal government from an agency. That might be more expensive percentage-wise than what we can earn in the local agency fund or the investment fund. But if there's only a 1 chance in 10 in a given year that we would have to do that, it actually is cheaper to handle the financial need that way than to carry year after year after year a very, very high reserve fund. I think that's where we ought to take the discussion.
Thank you, Committee Member Urban. Agreed that this would be a great agenda item for a future meeting. This meeting, we're more receiving an update and having just sort of initial discussion, since it's been a little while since this has been on our agenda. And then stating the obvious, this would be a council level decision that the Finance Committee just offers recommendations on. Okay, any other committee member comments or questions regarding this agenda item? Nope. Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill. And we're moving to public comment. Dave Cardinal.
Hi there. I love the fact we have money. As far as what to do with it, I'm a little concerned that we're disconnected. Whereas one hand says we're way short of what we can do to provide affordable housing. We're way short of what we can do to underground utilities. We're way short on infrastructure. And if we give that money back or away that we have, it's very hard, as we all know, for communities to raise taxes or get more money. So I would love to connect the dots between, if it's legally possible, the money we have and the things we want to do, rather than think of them separately. Thank you.
Thank you. Rita.
Well, I just want to say that it was a breath of fresh air to hear that report, that financial report by Mr. Urban, to be Dr. Urban. I think when the next audit, perhaps he was out of town or unavailable, but thank you for coming back onto this committee. And I really hope that for the next 2 audits, you get to read through the documents. I really like your suggestions about balancing out the money and possibly giving some of it back to some of the donors that gave money and the things weren't actualized, and to look at paying off or transferring around the different debt or buying more debt. It's just refreshing. Out of all the meetings that I've come to for this particular committee, it's refreshing to hear those words. So thank you for coming back. If you need your kid babysat next time so that you can be at this meeting, I'll help you out, but thank you.
Okay. Last chance for any committee discussion. Okay. Thank you again, Committee Member Urban. Agenda item 5C is form subcommittee on inclusionary housing fund. So I think most people know about the inclusionary housing fund. There is a number of pages at the end of our agenda packet regarding this task and this fund. So basically the town has about $4.5 million spent.
I thought it was 3.5. Little under.
Okay. 3.5, thank you. And there is not a policy yet on how to spend these funds. So 3 committees were asked for their perspective on how to spend these funds, and then it will be worked on by staff and approved by council, I believe. So I am requesting that we form a subcommittee on the Finance Committee to put together a set of recommendations regarding this inclusionary housing fund. And there is a series of questions in the agenda materials to guide that subcommittee. So I will open it up for committee discussion, but with the goal that we could form a subcommittee.
Yeah, I'll start. I read the proposal with interest, and I believe for those in the public who may not have seen it, the proposal is for the, oh gosh, I forget what it's called, not assisted living, but yeah, Willow Commons, over at the former real estate office over near Roberts Market. And that development, the idea is whether we should subsidize 7 of the units in order to have them guaranteed as very low income housing, which I believe is a key need of the house of the town. Important to analyze, but we do also have to think about our limited funds and the fact that that subsidy would be $500,000 per very low income affordable housing unit. And I wonder if that's the best bang for our buck. Can we have the subsidy go further some other way, or is this the best we can do? And that would be a key thing for this subcommittee to wrangle with.
Yep, exactly. And just a point of clarification, the policy would be a general policy for the Inclusionary Housing Fund and not just specific to Willow Commons, though Willow Commons is the first applicant to ever apply for funds. So.
Right, but they're proposing to use up all of the
Yes,
funds.
they have
right?
requested the
Okay.
entire fund.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. Right.
So, any other committee discussion, comments, questions about this item before we move to forming a subcommittee?
Would take public comment in
Yeah.
between questions.
Anything from committee? Nope. Okay. Betsy Morgenthaler.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to weigh in something that perhaps not everyone on the Finance and Audit Committee is privy to, but at the turnover, December, I think 14th by memory, turnover of the town council from old to new, there was a lengthy consent item agenda. This item was pulled from the consent item agenda and eliminated from consideration because the outgoing town council reflected on a prior, I think 8 months prior to that, in the spring of 2022, direction to staff to create an overall and general policy for these funds, not specifically targeted to any applicant. So my concern about the presentation of this is it's witness leading, if you will. I would prefer a more general, holistic approach to how we can best use the funds, scarce as they are in the eye of a much financial need, knowing what money could do for us if only we could go out and buy an empty field. So I really would like to take a greater step back than this proposal allows us to do, as presented to the ad hoc committee. Thank you for entertaining that thought.
Yeah, thank you, Betsy. I believe this committee has that intention and that instruction and will take a broad approach to the policy and not just to the first applicant.
Except the first applicant was teed up.
Yep,
That
makes
nothing
thank you, Betsy.
biased.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Okay, Rita.
Yes, I'm going to say the same thing. On the agenda, it says a form subcommittee on inclusionary housing fund. And I was going to mention what happened at the town council meeting on December 14th before the changeover from the consent calendar. But I do find it a bit misleading that the agenda item says to form the subcommittee, but then it's a request for a particular project. And we don't know how many projects are going to be happening in our town. Our housing element has not been approved yet. We have so many units that have to come in. We don't know what the needs are. And no one is actually talking about infrastructure needs that the town is going to have to pay to support all of the projects that are going to be happening in this town. And the amount that's in the inclusionary housing fund, I know there were a couple of finance people were here, but this particular committee had agreed that it was about $4.5 million several meetings ago, because there was a question of it was 3 point something, and after one particular thing, it's about 4.5, I think maybe 4.6. And I see that Greg Franklin is on here, and he can probably confirm too, because it was a question of him saying that it was one amount, that it was about over 4, and it was then corrected to admit that it was over about 4.6. So it is misleading, and if the subcommittee is formed, perhaps it needs to go back to the town council. I know council member Haskell, she's a new member of the council, and she might have something to say on that particular thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this will definitely end up back with the town council. Dave Cardinal, are you raising your hand on this agenda item?
I am. This one makes me a little frustrated. First of all, please make a subcommittee or a committee or whatever to get this done. We've had this funds, we've had the money from Blue Oaks for 15 years, I think since 2008. And we were never able to find a way to spend it on anything useful. And now for the first time in 15 years, somebody has an amazing project and they'd like some help. Now, I was blindsided by the number I heard tonight. I thought that the project proposal was to get the fees refunded, which would be about $250,000 or 6% or whatever of the fund, which I think would be great. But no, I don't think we should spend the whole fund on the development. I didn't read that in the request, and maybe I missed it. But I do think we need to move along, and it's always bring me another rock. Like, let's make a committee, make more policies. And literally for 15 years, we looked at buying Al's Nursery, we looked at building on the lots in Blue Oaks, and everybody has an objection, and they always will. So if we want to do it, somebody's got to actually do it. And I hope we get off the dime and do something. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy, would you like to share something?
Yeah, I just want to correct the record. I was working off of, my apologies. I was working off of our fund activity summary, which, was prepared in June, adopted by the council in June. That's 3.8. I forgot that just 3 months ago, an additional amount of money came in from a subdivision at 40 Firethorn, which does bring the total amount up to $4.6 million. So just make sure that everybody's on the same page. That's not reflected in the fund balance because that's obviously a budgetary document that was prepared 6 or 7 months ago, but that's the current amount.
And just to help, where does this additional money, where is this from?
It's from a subdivision. These are like pre-SB 9 subdivisions.
Yeah.
So when you do that work, you're required to pay an inclusionary fee. So that amount is significant, $870,000 from the one subdivision.
Okay.
Sorry
really
about that.
helps.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for explaining the difference in the numbers. That's material. That's very good.
Great. Well, it will be very important to come up with a policy regarding this fund. And I think the Finance Committee's input will be very valuable. So is there any more discussion from any committee members or questions regarding this? I mean, I'm thinking most of the discussion can happen in the subcommittee.
What core competencies would be helpful on this committee,
On the subcommittee.
on this subcommittee?
Jeremy, it looked like you had something to say, and then could you answer that question? What core competencies?
I'll do my best. Thank you, Michelle. I think that's a good question. Every committee brings its own flavor and expertise, and they tend to be obviously related specifically to what that committee does. So when Race and Equity looked at a similar issue earlier last year, they're looking
Same task.
right.
Yeah.
They looked through that lens of what would be the most equitable thing to do in a race and equity sense. So I don't want to get too far ahead of the committee here, but I'm thinking about what Mr. Urban was saying a little bit earlier in the previous item, that look at it through the lens of how the town should be spending its money. I think that makes perfect sense. I would not expect this committee to be creating policy around specific projects. That does not make sense to me. This is more of a fiscal responsibility and stewardship conversation I think the subcommittee is having. So I think that humbly offered that would be my recommendation. I was also going to point out that I think it just very specifically should be time set. So that the committee can do its work over a very particular bit of time and make that presentation to the committee and then the council at some point.
Okay. Do we need to set that time in this meeting, or can the subcommittee decide that after?
The only issue with that is the next likely meeting of this body is 3 to 4 months out. if we're back on the schedule, 4 to 6 a year, we're looking at probably,
3 months max.
3 months.
Mhm.
So I would imagine the subcommittee would want to work on that during that period of time. So you may want to just set a date, and maybe it's April at some point.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Okay. If there are no more questions or comments from the committee, then I would ask that we form a subcommittee. And we are only 5 of 7 today. But that's okay.
Isn't this normally through the chair when you appoint Stephen and Jason?
We could do that. That could be our route. But this is a really, a really interesting topic, and I want to give members who are here first.
How many members are you looking for?
I would say 2 to 3.
2 to 3. Okay.
Is anybody in this Zoom room interested in this subcommittee?
In the physical room, or are you going to Zoom first?
Committee members present in this meeting.
Okay, I'm interested. I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about. I think Dave Cardinal made an excellent point. We need to get off the dime here. We have more need for the money than we can use it for. And the question is, what's the most effective way to achieve the aims we have to achieve?
Mhm. Any other committee members in this meeting interested in joining Committee Member Savage on the subcommittee? Well, George, I would love to join you on the subcommittee.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and
Super.
we will reach out to committee members Kasani and Pressman also to gauge their interest and encourage them to
Okay.
join the subcommittee.
Super.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you for volunteering.
I see another hand from the public, but I think we're over public comment. Okay, gonna go to the next agenda item, 5D. Discuss the fiscal year 23-24 budget and committee workshop that happens with the town council. Jeremy, could you give us some orientation to this?
Sure.
agenda item, please?
This is still a relatively new process for the town. If you recall, 5 or 6 years ago, the budget process was very simple. The council saw a draft budget, and that came after the finance committee saw a draft budget. So the process that we've constructed now and that we've been implementing in pieces over the last few years is the following. The budget process for the next fiscal year kicks off at the second meeting in January, where committees and commissions are welcomed into a study session with the town council to discuss their priority items for funding in the next fiscal year.
So that's this upcoming meeting?
Correct, that's
Okay.
January 25th. Then we would follow up with mid-year budget updates. We would follow up with council priority study session. That's one of 2. So by typically the first meeting in March, the council has, based on input from its own members, the public committees and commissions, provided the staff with direction on the construction of the budget. Then we take a couple months to do that, bring it back to the finance committee. So this is an opportunity for this committee to share any areas that it would like to see the council commit funds to. I think about this more as a special, a project-based ask, not on operational related issues, but if there's a particular study, a particular endeavor of that ilk that the finance committee believes that the council should pursue, this next week is a good time to share that through the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, so just opening up conversation to committee members about this request for input from the town council. And I think in the past, the finance committee have been relatively quiet in terms of project-based priorities. But yes, just opening up the conversation to committee members now, if you see particular priorities or areas you'd like to see funding directed in the upcoming fiscal year that we could then share with council.
Yeah, I don't know if we do it routinely or not, but in the private sector, we frequently conduct compensation surveys and that sort of thing to make certain where we're benchmarked. And, that would be something to spend money on, given we're letting town residents down structurally by being late on certain things like the audit, most definitely. And we're interviewing lots of people and finding it very difficult to identify, recruit and retain talent. So we may need to take a project look at that, about how do we fix this structural problem so that we don't just start getting angry when we miss milestones, but we actually do something material to fix it.
But through the chair, if I may, your comments are impeccably timed, George. The staff has been looking at a compensation study for these very reasons. We actually have, I received last week a proposal to do such a study. I asked staff to go out and actually get some additional ones because they thought it was a little costly. But we certainly identified that even though we've done quite a bit of work in trying to find the right place for certain salaries, there's more to do, and we would really benefit from some expertise. So for what it's worth, I would certainly welcome that recommendation from Eli.
Other committee members with input on this agenda item? It's just stating the obvious, but it can't help to, can't hurt to mention the importance of getting back on track with the audit, and to be able to support the town in the resources it needs to do that, which is also related to community member Savage's point. I think we've heard that abundantly from the public, and as committee members all agree.
So Jeremy, there's apparently some new state law that requires posting the salary ranges. Does that apply to the town as well?
Yes, and I'm working with Cara Silver, our town attorney, to finalize all that and get that information up. So we should have that up soon. And that information is available through public record too. It's certainly not a secret. Thanks.
You know, it was when you post a job, you're supposed to show salary ranges.
Yeah, and we've historically done that. There may have been times in the past where that's not happened depending on the job, but we typically do that and provide the range that we're offering. So that's our practice.
Okay, unless there's any other committee comment, we'll move to public comment. Okay, moving to public comment, Rita.
Thank you for taking my comment. I hope when we look at the compensation ranges, also looking at possible skills that the town doesn't have that we need to invest in, analysis on what contractors, maybe there are some contractors we can flip over into employees that have certain skills that we're looking and need for a long term. Looking at the warrant list, which actually people in the public actually do look at the warrant list each meeting. Looking at the warrant list, the amount of money, over $100,000 a month that we're spending for contractors, including Cara Silver, it's a lot. It's a lot. And perhaps some of those contractors we can flip over. Sounds like we're going to need some of them for a very long time, that we can flip over into employees. Whether they have a chair at the building or not, we do have enough space on the property that we could look into space, but let's look into flipping some of those people. And I don't know who would do the analysis on that. Perhaps somebody on this committee. We have some very, very well qualified people on this particular committee. So perhaps someone can look at that, because it is over $100,000 every month, and with no documents being finished, but new projects being started. So some of them should be flipped over, because we've been paying them for many years, same people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, one area that staff has explored, possibility of finding those who we contract with to come over for employment is actually more in the public works maintenance fields. No one in the private sector is going to take a public sector salary with equivalent skills at the management level. It's off by hundreds of thousands of dollars. in many cases. So that's less likely of an opportunity to explore. But we've certainly looked at it the public works side.
Thank you, Jeremy. Nan Shostak, I see your hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I have a project to propose, and I've been thinking about it for quite a while, and I think it would be of tremendous use for the town. And that is a handbook for new residents that explains how the town works. It would explain, I mean, to Rita's point, it could, for instance, from the finance committee, there could be a contribution explaining how to read the town's financial statements, what things actually mean. From the geologic safety committee, I'm thinking we could explain a very particular set of seismic and geologic circumstances, and be happy to start contributing that. And all the other committees could contribute something to the handbook, and the town structure could be explained. I am struck by the discrepancy between, I mean, there always seems to be talk of the older, old timers in town versus the new people. And I'd really like to get everyone on the same page, so everyone really understands what the town's about, what it's trying to accomplish as a whole. I mean, all of us together. And I think that a handbook that's maintained online and could be printed out would be particularly helpful. So I put that to the finance committee. I will mention it to some of the town council members and see if people are on board with that. At the very least, the Geologic Safety Committee can certainly describe our special circumstances here. Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. It's seems like a fine idea. Probably not a project specifically for the finance committee, but if it takes off, I bet the finance committee could contribute. I see Dana's hand up. Dana Breen.
Hi, Luce. Hi, you guys. As you know, I don't come to very many of these meetings, but I was just kind of listening to you, and maybe you just answered it, Luce, is that isn't how you spend the money isn't that a policy thing? Isn't that for the town council to decide, and that you guys decide if you have enough money to pay for it? I mean, I don't even know why you're having a subcommittee on giving the money to the property on Alpine. So I guess I'm just confused and I don't understand. So there you go. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Dana. Yes, it is the committee's role to advise the town council on financial and audit matters. Any more members of the public? Okay, bringing it back to one last chance for committee members to have input. I think we heard a couple of ideas that could be shared with the council. Are there any more? Okay, great. Moving on to agenda item 5E. This one is discuss budget deficit and revenue generation brainstorming and to form a subcommittee or study sessions. I will mention that Council Member Warnikoff has brought a lot to this committee since she's been on the council. She has been bringing attention to this very important issue, as well as to some other helpful things for our committee. Just a point of context, but Jeremy, could you offer us some context on this?
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, first of all, I'm really appreciative that the committee's considering offering their expertise in this arena. As everyone knows, this year is the first time in a little while that we've run an operational deficit in our budget. It's described in the transmittal memo to the council in June. I can go into some detail in a moment. We have, certainly most years run a deficit as it related to some additional expenditures for our road maintenance work. So that's not a new concept. The operational deficit this year, as we believe, is driven by a housing element, consultants, and a need to make expenditures there. I do not believe this to be a long-term operational deficit, although one of the challenges will be that two of the positions that were funded by the council were ARPA funded. One we talked about tonight, the other being a maintenance worker position. So if we do add those to the budget on a regular basis, we'd have to find another revenue source. Since I've been here in the last 7 years, I have seen a huge increase in the expenditures related to software. We no longer own software, we rent software. So those costs are ongoing. And that will continue to be the case as we try to provide more up-to-date, transparent information to the public. To give you an example of one area that we're working on right now, we use a software called EnerGov that provides land use. It provides information on land use permits. So building and planning department. So right now, there's no transparency portal. The new version of it that we've been working on for a little while now will have that. So people will be able to go online, but these are not cheap. And none of these are built for small towns. I spend a considerable amount of my time articulating to those who do software that you built this for San Mateo, you didn't build this for a Petrola Valley, so we can't pay at the same range. So there's a lot of, as you would imagine, back and forth on that in that regard. And we also see costs increase in some very high ticket items. The sheriff's contract, for instance, went up considerably in the last 5 years. We're going into negotiations starting next month. I would not anticipate that to change. I would expect that to continue to rise and outstrip our historic revenue sources, the primary one being property taxes. This year for the budget, Cindy and I were a little less conservative in our approaches related to property taxes because over the last 2 previous years, we were certainly bringing in a little bit more than we had budgeted for. We like the conservative approach, but this year, we buttressed that more. The town is somewhat recession-proof from that perspective because any house that was bought and then sold, 10 years later, 11 years later, 15 years later, 20 years later, is bringing a considerable more amount of property taxes in which we get a small portion of. So I think this is a long-term trend as we move down the road into subsequent fiscal years that we may struggle eventually with having built-in operational deficits. And finding that balance is really is the hardest thing. And the conversation tonight has been really appreciative and illuminating because on one hand, I think we're frustrated by the fact that, we want to find more people, we want to pay them appropriately, but we're also faced with having to find ways to fund that. And there is not the kinds of revenue sources that I would turn to in larger cities. We do not have a transit occupancy tax, for instance, that brings in a ton of money for cities that have hotels. So we don't have those streams. They're either going to be pretty creative, if I may use that word in government, or they're going to be, more of the ilk of something that we take to voters at some point down the road. I'm not recommending any of this. This is just conversation only at this point. So I would love to hear the input of the committee. I think this is not a one-time conversation at all, particularly a couple minutes before we might be ending. And whatever the staff can do to support that, I think would be fantastic. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that context. I would also point out that just vegetation management has been a really big new line item and obviously is critical and very desirable. So the goal here is to form a subcommittee or study sessions. What's the difference between study session and like a study session involves the whole committee or?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to a subcommittee.
Yeah, so study session is the venue where it happens. So that would involve the entire committee, and a subcommittee is got the assignment of a study session essentially offline.
Do you have a preference or recommendation for a subcommittee to work on this or a whole committee study session at a future point. And then I would also put this question to the rest of the committee.
I do think that the committee's input is valuable here. It depends on how much every committee member wants input wise, but I actually think it's sort of a mix. I think there's a subcommittee that does a little bit of work, bring it back for a discussion. That might not be the end of the discussion. So it might be nice to put it in the phraseology of a study session.
Yeah.
So the body can hear that. You could easily call it an action item too. That's if you thought you could get through it in one meeting of the entire body.
Mhm. Okay, well, I'm gonna open up this agenda item to the committee for discussion, but that is with the context that this is a big topic and we're taking it to a subcommittee or future study sessions for more in-depth discussion. So we don't need to talk about everything now, but if there is something that somebody really wants to mention right now.
I'm sorry, Lucy, I keep interrupt that line of thought to the chair. I want to re-emphasize what I heard from Bill earlier too, that I think it's very difficult to have this kind of conversation in a vacuum.
Mhm.
And I think it would be a couple things I would suggest. First, I would, I think part of this can come up next week during the budget session with the council. Because I think there's going to be some staff support involved, and that's an ask of revenue on some level. So I think that would be fair, just so the council understands where the committee is going. That there could be a very broad conversation about, how the town utilizes its funds, where it spends it, et cetera. So I would think on that a bit. Within the vacuum, I think there can be valuable work done, but it may not have a relationship to where things are in a year, if that makes sense, depending on what the committee talks about over the course of time on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to wonder, this seems relatively core to what the finance committee is all about. So if it's appropriate, why don't we schedule a special meeting, out of the normal sequence, and we're all there, and that's the one topic, obviously we have the open communication period and what have you. And that way all the residents can show up and be part of the conversation about what do our long-term expense trends look like versus revenue, and what's the best way to handle it.
Mhm. Thanks for that suggestion. Any other suggestions, comments, discussion from community members? Okay, yeah, I would personally be in favor of what community member Savage suggested, to just schedule a special or a meeting of the finance committee that is focused on this item and doesn't have 8 agenda items, so that the wisdom and intelligence of the whole committee, not in a vacuum, can participate in this very important conversation. General support from committee members for that approach? Okay. Great, so we will schedule that meeting. Might be sooner than 3 months.
Oh, I hope so. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I think this is very
and
timely.
that's the
Yeah.
point. We can just meet more regularly, and if somebody has
Great.
conflict, they have a conflict. But,
Yeah. Sounds good.
get together most of it.
Okay, are there comments from the public on this agenda item? Rita?
Thank you for taking my comment. I hope that this meeting does meet more than, 4 times a year, this committee in total, especially with it sounds like the other audits wouldn't be ready until, late February or March, when the materials are ready for them to be worked with by the auditors. But it's hard to talk about a budget, putting together a budget, when we don't have those year-end financials done and those audits done, to see what we do have, instead of just planning once again to take money out of the reserves to try to balance or project what we'll need for the budget. So perhaps this particular committee can work to help, this little subcommittee can work to help pull together whatever needs to be done to get those 2 audits done, so that we can start with a cleaner slate We have a new council. This is the same town. Let's put the energy there so that we can see what we have instead of, balance your own bank books before you want to go buy a new car or a new fancy outfit. Look what you have in your closet. Look what needs to be done first before we start buying new things, planning new things. Thank you.
Yeah, Rita, my only response to that, just a clarification for everyone, is audits are extremely important, and it's good governance 101, and everyone knows that I'm beating this like a drum. But we do know what our finances are, and we do have, at the budget and the actual expenditures are on the website. And so there haven't been any material errors found in the latest audit that we just have done for a couple of years ago, and I don't anticipate we'll have any material discrepancies going forward. So we do know what our finances are and what the trend is. We haven't had the auditors bless them in recent years, which again, I believe is a big problem that we have to address, but it's not the same as not knowing what our finances are. That's all.
Yes, thank you for that distinction, Committee Member Savage. Okay, so just to clarify, we're not appointing a subcommittee here. We are going to schedule a meeting of the Finance Committee sooner rather than later to have the whole committee discuss this very important topic. Okay, great. Moving on to 5S or 5F. Discuss committee chair position. Yeah, so currently I'm the committee chair, but I'm going to be stepping down now after we elect the new chair as chair, and it's been wonderful to be chair of the Finance Committee. I wish I could do it more. This situation is sort of related to I am on another committee, and I became chair of that committee with the understanding that one could be chair of two committees. But that was actually, and it is possible in the handbook you can have a special dispensation, but it went to the council at their last meeting, and they did not want to make that exception. So the other committee is the Race and Equity Committee, and that is a young committee that needs the support of a committed chair right now. So it just seems like that committee needs me more. But I do feel sad to end my chairship of this committee tonight, because in October 2021, I had shared with the committee, I had asked to step down and shared that my wife and I are expecting a baby and my bandwidth would be reduced. And nobody else volunteered as chair at that moment. So I continued as chair, and it's been a little bit of a bumpy year because my bandwidth was reduced, as I said, and the audit issues have come up. And yeah, I am back on my feet. The baby's about to turn 1, and I was really excited at the prospect of another year where this committee's will for me to continue as chair to just really wrap things up on a higher note and help to get things on track for this committee. But that is not the will of life right now. So anyway, stepping down as chair now, which means we will need to elect a new chair. We are missing 2 members. Not sure how, I don't know if anyone can nominate a member that's not here. But
Yes, you can.
okay, Jeremy's saying we can do that. But let's look maybe amongst committee members that are here right now, if anybody wants to throw their hat in or nominate someone else.
Well, I'll volunteer unless someone else wants to do it. And let me explain, it's not out of any personal ambition to be chair. It's been pointed out to me that I've been on this committee for 27 years, and I've always managed to avoid having the chairman role, and that it may be time for me to get my share of the blame for whatever goes wrong, rather than sit in the background throwing spitballs. So, unless somebody else wants to bail me out of this.
That would be super, George.
Yeah.
You don't have to write minutes.
Is that true? Is that universally true? You don't have to write your own
Well,
minutes?
yeah, because you're too busy running the meeting.
Yeah, but you do a great job of taking minutes too, so.
Oh, thank you so
No.
much, George.
It's true, losing a great secretary.
I think it's a
Every-
great idea. I hardly endorse it as a outsider, former committee member and chairman coming back.
Okay. Well, I also think it's a great idea. So does anyone want to nominate George Savage to be chair of the finance committee?
I nominate George.
Does anyone want a second?
I would like to
I'll
second.
second it.
Okay, we got 2 seconds, but Bill was first. So then remaining members can vote. Ken Levine, how do you vote?
I am in favor of George.
Great. George, how do you vote?
I'll vote for me.
Okay, I will also vote for you.
Thank
So
you.
we got 5 for 5 for George Savage as new chair of the finance committee.
My
That'll be
free
great.
time has just decreased. Lucy, thank you very much for your service and
Oh.
your energy and enthusiasm. It's been terrific.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
And you are still on the committee.
I'm
so
still on
good.
the committee. Yeah, I'm on a subcommittee with you.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, G is discuss possibility of an independent audit committee. I'm looking at the time. It's 5 after 5. Not with this. Oh, wait, are you chair now?
Am I? Well, why don't you close out the meeting? This is your,
I'm going to be horribly bureaucratic here, which is awful, but I think that there is a new chair. So the new chair should take the rest of the meeting. So
okay.
Oh,
Chair
no.
Savage, congratulations. All right. Lucy, thank you for your service.
I'm taking my own minutes. All right, so what is the remaining agenda item? It is for an audit subcommittee, is my understanding. The notion here would be to draw, this is a question actually for you, Jeremy. If we were to form an audit subcommittee, would we make this committee members of the finance committee, or would this also potentially include other members who are not on the finance committee, but would be a member only of the audit committee?
Did you say a subcommittee or
Yes.
did you say committee?
I think we said subcommittee is what is in the
Um,
agenda item, right?
Through the chair, may I chime in?
Yes.
I think we were talking actually about a committee because at the last
Ah.
finance committee meeting, there was a chorus of suggestion to have an independent finance committee.
Got it.
In that discussion,
Independent audit
yeah,
committee. Yep. got it.
Independent
All
audit
right.
committee, yeah. You know, in that discussion, we could float the idea of a subcommittee instead as opposed to an independent committee. But basically, I wanted to include this on the agenda in this meeting because there was a lot of enthusiasm from the public at the last meeting for this. And obviously, this would be a council decision, but it just seems like at some point, this discussion will come to the council. And I just, when I put it on the agenda, sort of wanted to get the pulse of the finance committee,
Okay.
whether this would be an idea that is supported or advisable.
Okay, well, let's start the discussion and I can kick it off with just some thoughts. I've heard from a number of members of the public that there's concern about the timeliness of the audits, and the thinking would be that if you had a committee dedicated to this in a manner analogous to a board of directors audit committee, folks would pay attention to that in a more dedicated way and could potentially be on deck to communicate with auditors and town staff about issues and communicate then to members of the public in a more frequent basis that was, furthering transparency. I think that's the idea. I'd love to hear from everybody else about what you think on the committee.
Yeah,
Michelle?
yeah, I guess it's unclear to me what the committee would do. And I think we've already talked about volunteers to help the finance people and trying to pay more to hire people. I'm not quite sure what another committee would do. Maybe someone could clarify.
I agree with Michelle. I don't understand the reasoning for this. I'm open to someone telling me what the advantage will be. I do understand, as all of us do, that we fell behind for 3 years, and we've been falling behind, as I indicated last time, for around 6 years. But a committee is not going to solve that problem, and a committee won't even necessarily identify it. And so I don't see the value of forming that committee.
Yeah.
I would mention that part of what makes Portola Valley wonderful is the number of committees we have and the volunteer participation in town government. And at the same time, we really have a lot of committees in this town. And I think that that does contribute a certain cost and burden on staff. And so from that perspective, I would just wonder whether we want to, just to seriously consider adding another committee.
So I have a couple of questions or ideas about what a audit committee might do. I mean, one of the things that's come out over the last couple of years, I think there's a certain sense, maybe by some community members, of frustration that the finance committee hasn't been accountable, haven't focused on the issue of the audit, the timeliness of it and so forth, and that they should have a role. They should in some way be responsible for hitting certain deadlines, making sure that their reviews of audits and meetings are done when the final documents are in and everything is wrapped up. They may even believe that there should be a role in the selection and hiring and evaluation of the auditor. I'm not certain how that's done now. I'm sure that's a town council hiring function, and Jeremy and his staff probably have a large role to play, but there might be a desire for a audit committee to play a stronger role in auditing or investigating any issues that might arise in an audit, so that the rest of the finance committee doesn't really have to dig into audit issues as much as maybe we have in the past, or accounting issues. I, for one, can read a financial statement, an accounting statement, but I can't answer auditing questions or testing things or control measure. I just feel out of my depth in doing that, and I shouldn't pretend just because I'm in the finance committee I know that stuff. And I know we have some skills already on the committee on that. Maybe we need some more, but I could think of those maybe 2 or 3 specific things that I think: the accountability function, the overseeing of the auditor, ensuring the finance committee does their review of the audits, at the opportune times and so forth. Maybe there's some other things, but that could be a start.
Yeah, my question for everyone is, again, this started with my misapprehension of the item in the agenda, which is whether a subcommittee would have the same function. In other words, the committee of the whole only gets together as many times as we get together, but around the audit period, whether there's a defined smaller group that makes it their business, perhaps somebody with CPA skills or what have you, we could pull all our members. But see if, as in the board of directors, you have a cohort that focuses on this matter and tracks to the schedule and perhaps could identify if resources aren't matched appropriately, and flag that for the town council, or do whatever to avoid getting us into this hole. And as Ken has already pointed out, we started to have some more delays progressively even before the pandemic that were less notable, but still just a trend of where the audit was not less timely than it had been historically. Anybody thoughts on that?
If there's no committee comment, I don't know if this is helpful yet, but I'll just throw out a couple things. I would suspect an audit committee would meet once a year, basically. As you were starting to describe this, George, a subcommittee seemed to be more in line with what folks who are communicating with us on this issue that it's important to them. That makes some sense to me. I don't want to put my thumb on the scale at all, but
Sure.
that makes some sense to me. Having someone that Cindy and her team can turn to if there's questions, if there's concerns, if there's something that's like, we don't understand why the auditor's telling. I mean, these things can come up. But as an independent committee, I don't know how much it's actually going to do. It feels like it would be once a year, and that's fine in and of itself. I think that the finance committee's done a good job reviewing the statements and moving forward. So that's certainly not a recommendation, again, not thumb on the scale. But I think we would certainly welcome any help from members of the committee in those times where that's necessary. And I think the other part, I think I think a lot of this is a transparency communication piece. I think that's where I've learned the most lessons. And having, I'll be blunt, no one wants to hear it from me. They'd rather hear it from who they see as a peer through a resident-led committee. That's it. So I think that there's great advantage to that, having an opportunity for that information. If there's something that needs to be conveyed, that there's a responsibility within such a group identified. For what it's worth.
Any other comment from committee members on the idea committee versus subcommittee? Or anything else about this issue? Can we hear from members of the public? Oh, okay. Let me. Help me out here while I'm.
I can help you, George, if you
Yeah,
want me
there we
to.
go. Oh, Dana has her hand up. I've got it in front of me. No. Is that an old hand?
Old
Okay.
hand.
All right. Very good. Rita, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you for taking my comment, but I'm been chair for at a large nonprofit for several years, audit chair, and I was on the audit committee before that time. And yeah, there's some rules and laws about the autonomy of the audit committee. You know, it's easy to do a quick search online, and usually an audit committee would meet 3 times, and one person of that audit committee would be somebody from the finance committee. They don't have a vote on the issues, but they can add comments to the issues. And so it would be a preliminary meeting with the finance staff and with the finance committee and the audit people, a follow-up meeting just to see preliminary drafts, and then a final meeting. So usually there's only 3 meetings, unless you have real serious issues along the way. But it's at a certain time of the year, for Portola Valley, after the books close, and once the year-end financials are ready, then it starts. But even in hiring the auditor, the audit committee would then do that to take away the bias of somebody working in that business or in the finance or in management of that particular company. But it's if you do just a simple search online, anyone that's interested in knowing what those rules are, they can look, and there are strict guidelines on who should be, but having some autonomy from the people that are actually signing the checks in doing an audit it would give the residents a lot of confidence. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rita. I guess the one difference just to think on though here is that nobody here is quote in management. The finance committee is not working for the town. So we're already independent. So I'm just wondering personally, totally independent committee or 2 or 3 members of this committee who would follow a process like what you described. Sounds like a great process.
And I'll volunteer.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. And then other hands, Betsy.
Yes, thank you. Congratulations, George. And may I join you in thanking Lucy for your 4 years of service as chair and more on the committee. You're a terrific town volunteer. I wanted to chime in. Jeremy and Bill Urban both spoke to one of the impact of settling the community residents at this time is a big plus. So I look at this proposal as building community confidence and see it as a good in that right on its own. Also, I did a little bit of background looking at our neighboring communities, Woodside, Los Altos Hills, and Hillsborough all have independent audit committees. So we would be following in the footsteps of our peers. whether the composition was fully separate from the finance committee or whether it was partially separate is, I don't think, of great import. And then third point, in casual conversations around town, there is a chair of finance who would be willing to serve on the audit committee, but not able to give time to the full finance committee. And so you might be able to recruit a couple of extra people who have specific and deep expertise that could help liberate some of, because your agendas tend to run long and longer than your time allotted. So I see a lot of reasons to support this and applaud your putting it on the agenda today, Lucy. Thank you.
Other public comments? And further committee comments on the matter? I think just to open in response to comments, given where we are with the audit and all the concerns in the community about it, having some kind of focused group paying attention to this makes sense. And I'm just wondering on the advisability of subcommittee or independent committee, which the town council could decide on. Comments from anyone else?
So if it's a subcommittee, we just do it ourselves and pick the members and set the responsibilities. If it's a separate committee, then there would be a presentation of the council explaining the need and why it would need to be separate and identifying potential members and so forth, and be their decision, right?
Yes, that's my understanding anyway. I'm not sure, for the reasons I already described, I see a need for a fully independent, whole separate committee. In fact, I think that might slow things down.
Jeremy, in your history of being here, have you heard that type of issue come up with the town council where they're saying, why don't we have an audit committee? Have they presumed or assumed it was just part of the finance function, and that's been?
Yeah, the name of the committee is the Finance and Audit Committee. So I think they've assumed that is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I may, I'm sorry, Lucy, I think there's also, I do think this needs to be a recommendation to council one way or another. If the subcommittee is going to start taking on a new kind of responsibility in interacting with staff, and I think that just needs to be discussed with the council, just to give, provide that input. It feels sort of akin to what the council has provided the Conservation Committee in actually having some duties for our landscape plan permit approvals. So I think one way or another, it goes to council just so they can have a discussion about it for what that's worth.
One question is, do we think we could field a subcommittee? Would people be willing?
Sure. I mean, I'd be willing for myself, and I would imagine we can find at least one other person. I would recommend as a way forward that we start there, because we can do that right now and recommend to the town council, obviously, that they sign off on that. But the notion would be to have direct communication with the auditors as appropriate and town staff to identify any issues and make sure that things are going smoothly, as Rita just pointed out, at a minimum, to talk about before the process, what they're going to do and what the issues are. And then as you're in process, having an update meeting on how things are going, what the issues are, what the, how things are going, and then a final wrap-up meeting. And then we go through the usual procedure with the whole committee. And if we needed a fully independent committee at some point, we would identify that, I would think. But the independence here is sort of built into this committee, right? Because none of us are conflicted.
And I just want to say this for the record, committee members have always had an opportunity to call up for auditor. That's never been an issue. I don't know if this is helpful or not. I did this analysis for another council member recently who asked me about if audit committees are the norm in other cities. I just looked at San Mateo County. You want me to run through those real quick?
Yeah,
I don't know if
please.
it's helpful or not.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Atherton has an audit and finance committee. Belmont has an audit committee made up of council members. They have no finance committee. Brisbane has no finance or audit committee. Burlingame has an audit committee made up of 2 council members. Como doesn't have either. Daly City does not appear to have either. East Palo Alto does not appear to have either. Foster City has an audit committee, but no finance committee. Half Moon Bay has a finance committee of council members. Although they may have been disbanded, I couldn't quite tell. They don't have an audit committee. Hillsborough has a financial advisory committee that includes audit. Menlo Park Finance and Audit Committee, it's a mix of council and appointees. Millbrae and Pacifica do not have finance or audit. We know Portola Valley. Redwood City is a finance audit subcommittee made up of council members. San Bruno, San Carlos, and San Mateo don't have separate or finance or audit committees. South City did not appear to have one either. Woodside has an audit committee. Those are real mix. And I
Okay.
think Los Altos Hills, I believe that their council serves as their audit committee. That my memory serves me correct.
Okay, well, what I would propose, and again, committee members object or have a different viewpoint, is that we ask the town council if we can have a subcommittee, audit subcommittee. And I grant what Jeremy just said, that any town council, finance committee member hasn't been prevented from calling, Grace or anyone else at Mays and Associates or whoever we want to, but it's a bit different from when you know that's your responsibility, right? If you know that, hey, I'm, rather than listening to people in the supermarket complain about the audit and saying, yeah, we'll talk about that at our next meeting. It's sort of like, oh yeah, that's my responsibility. I'll call Cindy or Jeremy or Grace, and as the issue is appropriate, and just find the answer in 3 minutes.
And through the chair again, I want folks to know, this is great. This is fantastic to have some additional people who are, have a responsibility to be in this with us together in this the way that you're discussing. So thank you for even considering it. Right?
I mean, I think the biggest way to fix the issues that we've had in the town is better communication, and what I mentioned before about things not being your problem, but it being our problem collectively. And if there's some sort of mismatch in terms of priorities, well, if everyone understands what's going on, you either change the priorities or you change the resources, or you do something to address our problem rather than finger pointing and things being late. And, if you're on time with one thing, you're late on something else, and either way you're in trouble, which never feels good. All right. What does everyone think about that on the committee as a proposal?
Support the creation of an audit subcommittee.
Okay. Do we need a motion on this? That we move that the town council consider that? You mentioned the town council
Yeah,
should.
I think it's good just to have a motion, just to be on the record.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I don't think I can get that on the next council agenda. It's completely packed, but we'll do probably the one on the 8th if that works. So I'll just communicate with you, George, on timing on that.
Okay. Do I have a motion that the town council we ask the town council consider creation of an audit subcommittee of the finance committee?
So moved.
Second? And we need to do roll calls? is that- Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to get away from it, but apparently state law still requires it.
All right. I take it since Michelle and Lucy just motioned it, that they're in favor. Ken?
Opposed?
You're opposed. Okay. Bill?
Aye.
And I'm aye. So motion carries. And with that, I think we've exhausted the agenda. Am I correct? Right.
Yes.
All right. If there's no objection, I'd love to have a motion to adjourn.
Can we talk about the timing of the next meeting? We mentioned the study session. Is that the next?
Okay.
Is that the next meeting?
Sorry, again, I'm being bureaucratic. Since that wasn't agendized.
Oh,
by-
sorry.
it's Just to go ahead and George, I'll contact you tomorrow. We'll just do some doodle polls and figure that out.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
We'll figure out the next meeting, and I would like to start getting more meetings on the agenda and the timeline reserved in people's calendars further ahead. It would certainly help me, given I travel a lot. So any motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right, second?
Second.
Second.
And I have to poll people again. Michelle,
Agree.
Lucy? Ken?
Agree.
Okay, Bill?
Aye.
All right, and I'm in favor too. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
All right. See you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
This is our last hybrid meeting, correct?
Yes, I believe so. I
Yeah.
think the public will still be able to Zoom.